Hi guys, in this video I will show you how to create a food website like this. As you can see, we're having an input to search for a specific recipe and the default value is pizza, that's why it is displaying all the pizza items. So if I type something like sandwich, it will display all the sandwich items, and if I click on no more, it will redirect us to a new web page, and in that web page it will display the full details of that recipe. As you can see, it is displaying name, price, time required, as well as instructions. So if we type something value like samosa, it will display the samosa items. So if I click on no more, it will redirect us to a new web page, and inside that web page it will show all the instruction to prepare that specific recipe, as well as that price of the recipe. So this website is also perfectly fit for the mobile screens. So if I minimize the window, as you can see, it is perfectly visible. So even if I click on no more, that food details is also perfectly fit for the mobile screens. So let's get started. So first of all, let me open my command prompt. So after that, I'm going to use vite web development server to host my files. So to use vite, we can simply use this command called npm create vite. So before using this vite, we have to install node. So after that, this command will be valid. So after entering this, it will ask us to name our project. Just wait. As you can see, it is asking project name. So I'm going to give the name as Food Fusion. After that, it will ask the library we want. I'm going to select React and then JavaScript. So after that, we have to go inside that Food Fusion folder, and then we have to use npmi, which is short for install. So after that, it will install the necessary packages that are required for our website. So just wait, it will take some time to install the necessary packages. So now as you can see, all the necessary packages are successfully installed. After that, to run our application, we can simply use this command called npm ramdev. So let me copy this and then paste it here. After that, click on enter, and then it will host our website in the localhost at port number 5173. Let's open our Chrome and then type localhost 5173, and then it will display this default page which is coming from vite. So let me stop this application for now and let me open this in our VS Code by using code.command. After that, click on enter. So now our project is successfully opened in VS Code. After that, let's run our file again by using npm ramdev command. So now, as you can see, we got some files which came from vite by default. So inside this, we have to remove all the necessary files. So we don't need this public folder. Simply delete that and then delete this asset folder. And then let's go to app.js file and remove all the unnecessary code for now. Let me select this, then delete it. We also don't need these logos. Simply remove this, and then we also don't want this. Simply remove these import statements, and then let's go to this app.css file and let's remove all this as well as this index.css. So now if you see our browser at port number 5173, as you can see now it is an empty page because we have removed all the default files which came from vite. So our root file is this app.jsx. So inside this, first I'm going to create a separate folder to store all our components in that folder. So I'm going to create a folder with name components. So inside this components, let's create a component with name header. So this header component is responsible for displaying header component. So inside this, first we have to export this in order to use that inside our root file. So inside this header, I'm going to write a h1 tag with content food fusion. Food fusion. So now let's import this header component inside our root component app. Let me. So after clicking on this header, as you can see, our header component is automatically imported. So now if you see our browser, as you can see that food fusion text is came in our browser, right? So now let's add some styles to this. So I'm going to create a separate folder inside this source with name styles. So inside this styles folder, we are going to create all our CSS files. So let me create a file with name header, which is responsible for styling the header component. Now let's import this header.css file inside our header component by using import and then styles and then header.css. So now our CSS file is successfully linked to our header component. Let me give a class name for this div tag like header container. So let's style this header container by selecting that using dot and then the class name which is header container. After that, let's add a background color for this as a black color and then give some padding of 10 pixels and make the position fixed at the top of the web page. Now let's check whether the styles are applied or not. As you can see, the styles are successfully applied, but it is not taking the full width. So let's add the width as 100% so that it will take the full width. Now as you can see, it is successfully taken all the width. But as you can see, there is a small gap here. So to remove that, okay, we have to add margin and then make the margin as 0. But still it is not removed. I think we have to give the left property as 0 and remove this. Now I think that space is removed. Now as you can see, that space is removed, right? So after that, as you can see, the text which is inside this header with foot fusion is not visible, right? Because the color of the text is black, that's why it is not visible. Let's change that color. So let's select this h1 tag inside our header.css file. Dot header container and then h1. So I'm going to change the color from black to this color, light green color. So now if you see the output, as you can see, the text is came. Let's make this text to be centered. So for that we can simply use text align property and make the value to be centered so that the text will be centered in the header. Let's also change the body's background color. As you can see, the body background color is white. Let's change that. So our root component is app.jsx, right? So as you can see, there is already a CSS file which is linked automatically by default from vite with name app.css. Let's go inside this app.css and let's add body property and change the background color from white to some this black color. So now if you see the output, the body background color is changed, right? Let's also change the font size, not font size, font style. I think it's looking ugly. I want to change that font style by using font family property, and then I'm going to use this Gilson's property. So after adding that, as you can see, the font style is successfully changed. So now let's create another component for displaying input and for the food items. So for that, I'm going inside this components. Inside this component, I'm going to create a file with name body.jsx. So let's export this by using RFC. So now inside this, I'm going to create an input tag. Now let's import this body component inside our app component. So here I'm going to import that body component. As you can see, it is automatically imported by VS Code after selecting the body. So now if you see the output, as you can see, you are not able to see that input. So let me close all files and open this body component. So let's add a CSS file for this component. So inside our styles folder, I'm going to create a CSS file with name body.css. Sorry, this should not be folder, it should be a file. Inside this, I'm going to create a CSS file with name body.css. Now let's link this body.css for our body component by using import and then styles and then body.css. So now let's add a class name for this div tag like container. Let's add it as body container. Now let's select this body container tag dot body container. Now let's add display flex. Let's make this to be display flex and display content to be center. And then let's add some margin top of 100 pixels. Now let's see whether that input is coming or not. As you can see, our input is successfully visible now. Let's add some styles to this input. So our input tag is inside this body container, right? So we have to give that body container and then input. So I'm going to give some padding of 100 pixels as well as border radius of 10 pixels. And then let's change the background color as black. So now it's looking good, right? But we have to remove the border. As you can see, we are having some border that is making our input ugly. Let me remove the border by using none. So now as you can see, the border is disappeared. As you can see, they are very close to each other, this header and this input. So let's give some margin top of 120 pixels. So now as you can see, there is a gap, right? But as you can see, after clicking on this and typing something, you are not able to see the value which is entered inside this input. That's because that input, currently the input color is black. As you can see, after selecting that, you can able to see that. But if I click on again, as you can see, whatever I'm typing here, that is not able to see. So I have to add the color from black to white. So now if I type something inside that, as you can see, it is clearly visible. Let's increase the font size as well. Let's make the font size as 18 pixels. Now you can able to see the input value, right? So after that, so whenever we type something here, we have to capture that value. So for that, I'm going to use a state variable inside this body component. Like I'm going to create a state variable with name recipe and then a function to update that recipe variable. Let's use useState. So after clicking on this useState, as you can see, VS Code automatically imports useState hook from React. Now, so initially I'm going to give the value as pizza. So now as you can see, that value is not coming inside this input because we have not given the value inside our input. So let's add value property and then give this recipe variable. So now if you see the output, as you can see the pizza is come inside this input value as default. But if we type something here, so I'm clicking backspace, but it is not removing this text because we have not added an onChange attribute for this. So we have to add this onChange attribute, and inside this we have to call this setRecipe function, and then we have to use this e dot target dot value. So now we are getting some error setRecipe. Let me see the console, guys. E is not defined. Okay, guys, we have to give a callback function, and inside this we have to pass e. E means event. So now as you can see, the default value is coming. Even if I type something, that value is displaying inside this like sandwich. So now we have to use an API to get the recipes which are matched with this input. So initially we are having pizza, right? So we have to display all the pizza items. So to display the recipe items, we are going to use an API called Spoonacler. So I'm going to use this Spoonacler API. So after that, simply click on this and create an account. So currently I already logged into my account. That's why I'm getting this interface. If you don't have an account, it will ask us to register, and then after registering, it will redirect you to this page. So from this, simply go to this docs and click on that. After that, Spoonacler will display all the API endpoints. As you can see, we are having so many API endpoints. So each API endpoint is responsible for displaying some values. So for authentication endpoint, it will display authentication and then search all food. So if you want to see, check it all. But in this video, I'm going to use this setRecipe API endpoint. As you can see, this is an API endpoint which is a get method. So simply copy this and then so if you guys are familiar with React, we have a hook called useEffect, right? So that useEffect is used to call external API endpoints. So inside this, I'm going to use that useEffect hook, useEffect. After clicking on this, as you can see, VS Code automatically imports this useEffect hook. So this useEffect will take the first parameter as a callback function, and then second parameter will be a dependency. I will tell you after some time what is the meaning of dependency. So for now, inside this, I'm going to create a function with name getRecipe. So inside this function, I'm going to create a variable like call API. So inside this, I'm going to use fetch method. So fetch method is used to call external API endpoints. So inside this, we have to pass our API endpoint, which is this. So for this API endpoint, as you can see, we are having some parameters. So in the context of URL, parameters are key value pairs, which are used to send a data to the server through URL. So let me show you an example. So I'm going to visit YouTube website, and from this YouTube website, I'm going to search my channel like Patience Coder. So please keep your eyes here in the address bar, URL address bar. So as you can see, currently it is www.youtube.com, right? But after I have typed Patience Coder, and if I click on this search button, as you can see, the URL address is changed from youtube.com to this, right? So from this, as you can see, the query parameter is search query, and the value for this search query is whatever we type to this input. We have typed Patience Coder, that's why it is displaying Patience Coder here. So in this Spoonacler website, we are going to use this parameter called query. So by using this parameter, we are going to get all the recipe details which are matched with this input. So whatever we type here, that value will be that value we will store that inside this query parameter. So let me copy this and paste it inside our fetch method. So I'm going to use backticks. So this backtick means template laterals. So template laterals are used to combine the strings and JavaScript expressions inside this. So to use JavaScript expressions, we have to write dollar and then curly braces. So this is our URL which is given by Spoonacler, right? So after this URL, we have to specify this parameter. So as you can see, while specifying a parameter, we have to while specifying parameter, we have to give this question parameter. So this question parameter will appear only for once in a URL. So now inside this, after this complex set, we have to specify question mark, and then after that we have to give the parameter name. So we are going to use this parameter name query. So I'm going to use query, and the value for this query will be a dynamic value, which is whatever we type here. So whatever we type here, that value will be stored inside this resp variable, right? Here we have given this value as resp. So here we have to pass that resp variable so that Spoonacler can able to know what we type here. Sorry, let me pass that first. Resp. So now whenever we type something here, we are going to send a request to this API endpoint, and we are pass in the API endpoint we are passing the user typed value, so that Spoonacler can able to know that value and display the specific response. So now after this, we have to specify another parameter which is API key. So API key is unique to every account. So as you can see, I have already logged into my account. So after you logged in, simply click on this My Console. After that, simply go to this profile section and click on this Show or Hide API key. So I'm going to copy this. So every account will have a unique API key. This is my unique API key. If you create a new account, we are going to get a unique API key. So from this profile section, simply copy this API key and paste it inside this. So let me create another query. Let me add another query. So if we add more than one query, we have to specify ampersand between every query. Every query. So after that, we have to give this API key, which is a parameter name, and for this API key, we have to give our API key value, which is this. So I'm going to store that API key value inside a separate variable, because if I paste that value here, this URL will be very lengthy, and you also get confused. So I'm going to create a separate variable like API key, and inside this I'm going to paste the API key. So now we have in the URL we have to pass this API key value. So we have to use dollar sign and then curly braces, and inside this we have to pass this API key variable. So now Spoonacler knows from which account we are sending a request. So after that, let me create another variable like response. So inside this response, we are going to store the value which will be received from server, Spoonacler server. So whatever, as you can see, we are sending a request to this Spoonacler and we are storing that inside this call API variable, right? So here we have to use that call API variable, and then we have to convert that value received from server to JSON. So whenever we make a request to this API endpoint, this Spoonacler will take some time to return a response. Since it will take some time, we have to await this. Since we are using await, we have to make this function async. So I hope you guys know about this async await. So these are used to manage promises. So here also have to use await because it will take some time to convert that value into a JSON. So now let me console the response. Now let's go to our website and click on inspect button and then console. So we are getting some errors. Let me refresh it. No, we are not getting errors, but we are not getting any value for this response variable. I think we made a mistake somewhere. Okay, guys. As you can see, we have created that function, but we are not calling that. So inside this, we have to call that function, so that a request will be made to this endpoint, and we are going to get the response inside this response variable. So now let's check the console again. As you can see, after refreshing it, as you can see, we have received an object, and inside this object, we have four properties. Let me extract this. As you can see here, we are having an number property with value 10 and then offset 0, and then here as you can see, we are having a results property. Inside this results property, we are having an array of objects which are 10 objects, and each object are having a title, a ID, and then image. So we are going to get the title and then image. So this object is referenced by this response variable, right? So but we have to give this response value to this resp, not resp. So whatever value received from this server, we have to store that value inside a separate state variable. So I'm going to create a separate state variable. So let me give a state variable name as food and then function to update that food variable, which is set food. And I'm going to use state. So initially the value of the food will be an array, but whenever we receive a response from this Spoonaclar server, we're going to update this food value with this response variable. So to update this food variable, we have to call this set food function, right? So let me call that set food function, and inside this we have to pass our response variable. So now whatever response we are going to get from this Spoonaclar API, that value will be stored inside this food variable, which is an array. So below this, I'm going to create a separate component to display all the food items. So let me create a component called foodlist.jsx. Foodlist.jsx. So inside this, first of all, let me export this, and then so whatever value we receive from the Spoonaclar server, we're storing that value inside this food variable, right? So inside this, I'm going to import that food list component. So after clicking on this, as you can see, the food list component is automatically imported from VS Code. So for this food list component, we have to pass this food variable because we are storing the value received from server are storing inside this food variable, right? So I have to pass that variable from using props. So now we have to pass. We are successfully passing this food variable to this food list component, and in the food list component, we have to receive this props, right? So inside this, you can simply use an object and then use food. So now we are successfully passing this food variable to this food list component. So inside this, the food is an array, right? And inside that array, let me refresh it. Oh, we are not getting any response, guys. Food. Okay, we have removed the console statement. That's why we are not getting any response. Let me see this. If we can refresh, as you can see, it is an object, right? And we are storing this object inside this food array. Now this array is an array of objects, right? And inside that object, we are having a results property, and the results property is an array of objects. So I have to loop through this. So guys, we are getting status failure. Okay, guys, we have to use dependencies here. So the dependency will be this respect. Now let's check whether it's working or not. First of all, let me check that. After that, I will explain why I'm giving this respect. So now we are not getting any response. Status failure. Guys, my daily points limit has reached. So they will provide a limited number of requests. So please try to create more than one account so that you can test this API. So I already have another account. I'm going to log into that account. Just wait. So now I have successfully logged into my another account, guys. So now let me tell you why I have used this recipe variable. So if we don't give a dependency to this use effect hook, it will run for infinite times. And inside that we are calling an API endpoint. So if we don't use this dependency, we are going to send an infinite request for this Spoonaclar API. So we have to avoid that behavior by using dependencies. So now this use effect hook will only be re-rendered whenever there is a change in this recipe variable. Like whenever we type something here, at that time only this use effect hook will be re-rendered. So that is the use of this dependencies. So by specifying the dependencies, this use effect hook will be re-rendered. Since we have given recipe inside this, whenever there is a change inside this recipe variable, only at that time this use effect hook will be re-rendered. So now as you can see, this object have a property called results, and inside that we are having an array of objects. So I only need ID, title, and image. So these three properties are inside this results property, right? And so this object is referenced by our response variable, right? This response variable is storing this values, which is an object, and from this object we only need this results property. So I'm going to give. So inside this set food, I only want to get the results property. So now let me console the response.results instead of response. So now if you see the output, we're only going to get this array. As you can see, we're only getting those and we are not getting this number and offset property here, right? So now these values are stored inside this food variable. So after that, we have to loop through this array, and we are only going to get title and image. So let me, so this food variable is passing through this food prop, right? And we are using that prop inside this food list component by using this food. So this food is a state variable, right? Here as you can see. So it is a JavaScript expression. So in order to write JavaScript expressions inside this, we have to write curly braces. So after that, you can simply use food dot map. So I'm going to use map function to loop through an array, and we're going to call a callback function on every element inside this food array. So instead of food, I want to give foods so that the naming convention will be good. Since we have even foods here, we have to give foods here, as well as we have to change the prop name from food to foods. So now inside this food list component, the value of this foods is this object. So I'm going to loop through this foods.map, and I'm going to give a argument name as food. So for every iteration, this food will reference a single object. So for the first iteration, this food will represent this first object with ID 65615, and for second iteration, it will reference this second one, and for third this, and then so on. So after that, I'm going to use a div tag because we are going to get title image. So I'm going to use this div tag, and inside this I'm going to use image tag. So in order to display images, we have to use image tag, right? So I'm going to click on this. After that, inside this source attribute, I'm going to give this property because the image is stored inside this image property, right? So here you can simply use food dot image, and then after that I'm going to get a p tag, and inside this we are going to display the title which is inside this title property. So here we have to give food dot title. So if I click on refresh, we're not getting anything, guys. I mean, we are not getting this title and image inside our output here. I think we have made a mistake somewhere. Okay, we have to return this. So we are only creating this due tag, but we are not returning that. So let's create a return, and let's create a parenthesis, and inside that parenthesis, I'm going to cut this from here and paste it here. So now I think we're going to get the image and that title from Spoonacular. Yes, we are getting that. As you can see, we are getting those food and title with black color. But the styles are looking very ugly, right? So I think we have to add some CSS styles. So this input and this food list component. So all these food items are coming from our food list component, right? And this food list is inside this body component, and inside this body component we are having input and food list. So we have to add some styles to this data with class name body container. So for that we have to go to this body.css file. So inside this, okay, we are only giving display flex, that's why they are displaying in same row. So I have to add flex direction to the column so that those will be appeared in same column. Now they are looking good, right? But this input width is too large, so let's add some width to this, like 20%, so that that width will be decreased. Now the width is decreased, right? But it is not in center. So let me give margin auto so that the input will be placed in center. Now it is centered, right? But as you can see, all these food items are displayed in same column. So this food image and food title are inside our food list and inside this div tag, right? So let me add a class name for this, like food list container. Let's add a class name for this as well. Let's give it as a parent. So now let's create a CSS file for this food list component inside the styles folder. So I'm going to create a CSS file with name foodlist.css. Now let's import this foodlist.css inside our foodlist component by using import and dot styles and then foodlist.css. So now first let's select this div tag with class name parent dot parent. So I'm going to make the display to be flex. So now if you see the output, as you can see they are in same row, right? As you can see, these images are taking more than the available width. So when it reaches to this, you have to display all these additional items below this first row. So for that, you can simply use flex wrap and make the value to be wrap. So now if you see the output, Whenever it reaches to the maximum width, and all the additional items will display below the first row. Now it's looking good, right? But as you can see, these are not in center. So to get that centered, we can simply use justify content center. So now those items will be centered, as you can see. But as you can see, there is a no gap between every food item. Let's give some gap of 10 pixels so that there will be a gap between every food item. Now as you can see, there is a small gap between every item, right? Let's give some more gap, like 20 pixels. Okay, now it's looking good, right? But as you can see, this input and this food items are very close to each other. Let's give some gap. So this input and food list are inside our body component, right? Here. So let's add some styles to this body container. Let's give some gap of 10 pixels. So now there will be a gap between input and this food items, right? Now let's add some styles to this food items. So for that, let's select this food list container. For food list container, let's make the display to be flex and flex direction to be column. And then let's add the justify content to be center so that this text will be centered. Those are not centered, guys. So let's add some styles to this image tag. So our image tag is inside this data with class name food list container. So let me select that image by using dot food list container and then image. Let's add some rounded borders for the image by using border radius. So now as you can see, there is a rounded corners for the images, right? Now let's change this text color from black to white so that you can clearly able to see. So this title is inside our paragraph tag, right here. So let's select that paragraph tag by using dot food list container and then p. Let's make the color from black to white. So now the title color will be changed. As you can see, now the title color is changed, right? Let's make this to be centered by using text align center. Let's increase the font size with 18 pixels so that the font will be bigger. Now as you can see, it is looking good, right? So after that, let's add a button below this title with content no more. So for that, we can simply go to this and let's add a button with content no more. So that button will be added for every food item, as you can see. Now let's add some styles to this button. So using dot food list container and then button. Let's add some padding of 10 pixels and border radius of some 8 pixels. And let's change the background color from white to black. So now if you see the output, as you can see, it is looking like this. But the text is not visible, like the content no more is not visible, right? Because the background color is black and the text color is also black. So let's change the text color from black to some light green by using this text code like BFF6C. Now we will get a radium color, light green color, as you can see. Let's remove the border so that it will look good. Let's make the border to be none. Now it's looking good, right? But I also want to increase the font size. So let's increase the font size like some 20 pixels and let's make the font weight to be bolder. So now it's looking good, right? So as you can see, after hovering on this no more button, the cursor is displaying the arrow. But I want to display a hand icon when user hovers on this no more button. So for that, you can simply use button and then hover. So when user hovers on the button, I'm going to change the cursor to the pointer. And also I want to add some border, like 1 pixel solid with light green color. Now if user hovers on the no more button, as you can see, the border is coming as well as a hand icon is displaying, right? As you can see, it's looking good, right? So now let's check whether our search is working or not. So let me type something like burger. As you can see, after typing burger, we are getting those values here. As you can see, some images width are very larger, right? So let me change the width so that it will look good. So for that, you can simply go to this image. Let's add some width as 200 pixels. Now let's check. Okay, 200 is very small, I think. Let's add some width as 400 pixels. Okay, now it's looking good, I think, right? So if I type something like sandwich, as you can see, they are looking good. So if I type something like gulab jamun, we are going to get all the gulab jamun items. So if I type samosa, we are going to get the samosa, as you can see. So now I want to add some styles to this image. Like if I hover on this, I want to add some zoom in effect. So for that, you can simply let me copy this. So when the other hovers on this image, you have to add this pseudo property hover. So when the other hovers on this, I'm going to add transform property and use this scale. So the default value of scale is 1. So if we add 1.1, we're going to get a zoom in effect when the other hovers on the image. So now if I hovers on this image, as you can see, it is it is zoomed, right, zoom in, but they are getting very quickly, like the movement is very fast, right? So I want to add some smooth effect. So for that, you can simply use transition property. So I'm going to add transition as some 0.3 seconds. So now the moving will take 0.3 seconds. As you can see, now we are getting a smooth effect, right? But if I don't hover on the image, it is quickly going to its default position, right? So to get very smooth effect, we can add transition for this image property as well, 0.3 seconds. So now when we hover on the image, the scale will be 1.1 and that movement will be, and the movement duration is 0.3 seconds, as well as if we don't hover, this transition will be after 0.3 seconds. So now we will get a smooth effect. So as you can see, after hovering on that, we are getting the image is zooming with some slow motion effect. If I don't hover on that, as you can see that is going back to its default position with some smooth effect, right? So now we have to add a functionality to these buttons. Like if we click on this more button, we have to redirect the user to the another web page, and in that web page we have to specify the details of a specific recipe. Like if I click on this more button, we have to redirect the user to a new web page, and in that new page we have to display full details of this recipe, which is pizza bites with pumpkin. So full details means we have to display the price of this pizza bites, as well as instructions for how to prepare that recipe, as well as how much time required to cook a specific recipe. So for that, so whenever we click on this more button, we have to redirect the user to a different path that will be displayed here. So initially, as you can see, initially it is localhost colon 5173, right? But after clicking on this more button, you have to change this path, and when the path is changed, we are going to display the food detail information. So in this situation, we need to manage routing, right? So if I click on this more, we need to change this path, which is route, right? So to manage routing, we have to use a library called React.js. So in order to use that, first we have to install that in our application. So for that, first we have to stop this, and then after that we have to install that React.js. So after that, it will install that package. Just wait. So now React.js library is successfully installed. After that, let's run our application again. So now in our application, we can able to use React.js. So our root file is this app.jsx, right? And this app.jsx is rendered inside this main.jsx, as you can see here. So now we need to wrap our app component inside a component called browser router, which is provided under React.js. So if I click on this browser router, as you can see, VS Code automatically imports that browser router component from this React.js library. So after that, now we need to wrap our app component inside this browser router. So now our application can able to use routing. So after that, let's go inside our app component. So inside this, after header, I'm going to use a separate component called routes. So after clicking on these routes, as you can see, it is automatically imported from this React.js library. So inside these routes, I'm going to create two different routes. So one route is responsible for display the food list items, and another route is responsible for displaying the full details of the recipe. So for that, I'm going to use route. So after clicking on this route, as you can see, VS Code automatically import the route component from the React.js. So inside this, we have a prop called path. So inside this path, we have to specify the path. So I'm going to give it as a forward slash, which means an entry point. So whenever we visit our website like this, so whenever we visit this website for the first time, the entry point will be this. So inside this route, we have another prop called element. So inside this element, we have to specify our components. So when the route is this, I want to import my body component. So now we have already given the body component. So here we have to remove this. So now if you see the output, as you can see, it is still looking same, right? and we are going to create another route. So let's create another route. So I'm going to give the path prop, and I'm going to give a value like food details, and then after this we have to provide a dynamic value because every every recipe have unique ID. I will tell you after, guys. First of all, let me write the code. So here I'm going to write a path parameter. So path parameters are used to get dynamic values in the root. So to specify path parameters, first we have to give colon. So after that, you can give any name you want. I'm going to give it as food ID. So when user clicks on this more button, we're going to redirect the user to this root. So when the root is this, we're going to display the food details. So I'm going to create a separate component to display all the details of the specific recipe. So I'm going to give it the name as food details.jsx. So let me export this. So now inside this we have to use element prop, and inside this element prop we have to give that food details component that we have just created. So after clicking on this, as you can see, it is automatically imported. So now when user clicks on this more button, we have to navigate the user to this path. So for that we have to add a functionality for our more button. So if user clicks on this more button, we are going to call a callback function, and inside this callback function we are going to create a function like handle no more. So now let's create this handle no more function. Function handle no more. So now whenever user clicks on this no more button, we have to pass the ID of the we have to whenever user clicks on this no more button, we have to navigate the user to this route, as well as we also have to pass the ID of the recipe. So here in the food list component, whenever user clicks on this no more button, so let me open the console. Let me click on refresh. We are getting some error. Each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Okay, guys, we have to add a key prop for this so that React knows when any item is changed. So we have to give a unique value for this key prop. So as you can see, we are having an unique value inside this ID property, right? As you can see, every recipe have different IDs. So I have to give these IDs. As you can see, the ID values are inside this ID property, right? So these objects are referenced by our food parameter, right? So here we have to give food.id. So now if you check the console, that error will be gone. So if I click on refresh, as you can see, we are not getting that error. So when user clicks on this no more button, we have to pass the ID value to this handle no function. So that ID is inside this ID property, right? So here we have to give food.id to this handle no as an argument. So now we are successfully passing the ID of the recipe to this handle no function. Now we have to capture this argument inside this function. Let's give it as a parameter as ID. So inside this, after clicking on the no more, we have to redirect the user to this route. So to navigate the user to different route, we have a hook called use navigate. So I'm going to use navigate. So after clicking on this use navigate, as you can see, it is automatically imported from React Prototype. So now let's store this use navigate hook inside a variable called navigate. So now our navigate variable is referencing use navigate hook. So let's give navigate. So this navigate will take a parameter as a root. So inside this, we have to specify our root, which is this food details. Let's give food details, and then as you can see, we are also having a path parameter right here, food ID. So we have to give a value for this path parameter from this food list component, and that value will be this ID. So here we have to give ID. So let me change this to backtick, guys, because we have to pass that parameter ID. So here we can simply use dollar sign and then curly braces, and let's pass this ID. So now when user clicks on this more button, they will be redirected to this path, as well as they are going to get the value of the ID inside this food ID path parameter. So after that, we have to do. Okay, now let's create. Let me close all files and open only our food details component. So inside this, so to get full details of the recipe, let's go to Spoonacler website, and from this we have to click on this get recipe information. So we have to copy this route. So this API endpoint will return all the food details. So let me copy this. And then, as you guys know, to perform, so all the API callings are inside this use effect hook, right? So let's use use effect hook, and use effect will take a first parameter as a callback function. So let's give the first parameter as a callback function, and inside this, I'm going to create a function like get full details. So inside this get full details, I'm going to create a variable called call API, and then inside this, we have to pass our API endpoint, which is this. So I'm going to use fetch to call external API endpoints. So inside this, I'm going to use template literals and then paste the API endpoint. So here we have to, after this information, we have to specify the root parameters, which is API key. Remember, we have discussed when using root parameters, we have to specify this question mark, right? So after question mark, we have to specify the parameter name, which is API key, and then for this API key, we have to give our unique API key value. So I'm going to create a separate variable API key. So inside this API key, I'm going to give my API key value. Let me open the body component here. I have the API key. Simply copy this and paste it inside here. So now let's pass the API key for this root. Let's give API key. So this will return a promise. So I have to await this. So since we are using await, we have to make this function asynchronous. So after that, we have to convert the data received from server to JSON. So I'm going to create a separate variable called response. So inside this response, I'm going to call this call API variable, and then we're going to convert the server server response to a JSON. So this also returns a promise. So I have to await this. So now let me console the response so that you can able to know what it is storing the value inside this response variable. We are only creating function, but we are not calling. So let's call that function get full details. So after that, I think that's it. That, so guys, as you can see here in the parameter, we have a curly braces, and inside this curly braces, we have an ID, and that ID is a parameter. As you can see, in the parameters they have provided a name ID, and they are giving that ID in the root. So if I hover on this, as you can see, they are displaying a title plus path parameter, path parameter. And if I hover on the second parameter, as you can see, they are displaying query parameter. This is query parameter, which is the key and value pairs, as we have discussed earlier. But here, if I hover on this ID, as you can see, it is path parameter. So path parameter is used to give dynamic values. So in the root, they are providing ID here, as you can see. So we have to replace this ID with this food ID, because we have given the food ID as a path parameter right here. So I have to get this food ID inside our food details component. So to get the details of the to get path parameter values, we have to use a hook called use params. So let's use params. So after clicking on this, as you can see, VS Code automatically imports that use params from this React.js library. So let's store this in a variable called params. Params. Let's console this value as well so that you can able to understand what it is giving the value for this params variable. So now let's check our console. If I click on refresh, as you can see, currently we are only getting this because we have not clicked no more button. So if I click on this no more button, now as you can see, ignore this errors for now guys, but as you can see, we are having a param which is food ID, because in the root we have given food ID right here, as you can see. That's why it is consoling this object for this params variable. So this use params will return an object. That's why, as you can see, it is displaying an object, and inside that object we have a path parameter which is food ID, and the value of that food ID is 658615, because we have clicked our first page item right, and the first page item ID is 658615. That's why we are getting this. As you can see, the path is also changed. Let me click on this before button. So if I click on refresh, as you can see, currently it is localhost 5173. But if I click on this no more button, the root is changed right with food details, because we have given food details inside the root, as you can see, and then we have given a dynamic value which is a path parameter with name food ID, and the ID of the food is 65615. That's why it is displaying that value here. So now let me open console and see whether we are getting any errors or not. So if I open console, as you can see, we are getting some error from the server. That means we are not getting any response from Spoonaker when we send a request to this API endpoint. Open Spoonaker. Okay guys, here we have to change this id value with this food id path parameter, because here as you can see we are passing the value as it is, but here this should be a dynamic value, and the dynamic value we are storing inside this food id. So this food id, let me open console. As you can see we are getting an object here, and inside this we are having food id. So this is coming from this console statement. So this params is an object which is storing this object, and inside this object we have a property called food id. So we have to pass this food id inside here. So replace this id with dollar sign and then curly braces, and then give food id. Food id. Now let's create this food id variable, const food id, and let's give the value as params dot food id. So now the value of this food id will be id of a respawn. Let me console that so that you can able to understand. So after that, let's remove this console for now, and let's open the browser. And if I click on refresh, as you can see, we are getting an ID, right? And that ID is coming after we are consoling this food ID. So this food ID variable is giving us this value in the console. As you can see in the below of this food ID, we are getting an object with so many properties. And this object is coming after we are sending a request to this API endpoint. So now whenever we click on this no more button, a request will be made to this API endpoint, which is Spoonacler API endpoint. And in the API endpoint, we are sending a dynamic value which is food ID. So now Spoonacler knows which food item should be sent to the client based on this food ID, and that response is this object. And this object is coming after we are controlling the value of response. This response is giving us this object value. So now we have to store this value inside a state variable in order to display it in the browser here. So for that, we have to create a state variable. So I'm going to create a state variable with name like food details, and then set food details to update that food details state variable. So let's use useState hook, and initially it will be an empty object, because as you can see we are getting object, right? So whenever we receive a response from this API endpoint, we are going to update that. We are going to update this food details from an empty object with this object. So we are storing this object to this food details. So for that we need to call the set food details function, right? So let's call that set food details function, and then inside the set food details function we have to pass this response variable. So now whenever we click on no more button, we are getting, okay, we have to add a dependency here. Let's add the dependency as food id. So now if I click on refresh, we will not get infinite request. So because if we don't add this dependency, this user effect hook will re-render for infinite times, and it will make so many requests for this API endpoint. So to prevent that behavior, we have to add a dependency variable as food id. So now whenever there is a change in this food id variable, and that time only this user effect hook will be re-rendered. So the value of this food id will be changed once we click on the no more button from the food list component, right? So now after that, simply remove this, and inside this, so now this food details value is this object, right? So from this object I'm going to get the image which is stored here, as you can see here in the image property. I want to get this image property, as well as what do I have to get, title as well, and then the price of the recipe stored inside this price per serving property, as you can see here. And I'm also going to get how many minutes we required to cook that specific recipe, which is stored inside this ready in minutes property. Also I want to get, what do I have to get, so let's extract this extended ingredients property. So inside this extended ingredients property, we're having an array of object, and each object have, we're getting what, so we don't need anything for this, guys, from this. So here this analyzer instructions, let's extract this. As you can see in this analyzer instructions property, we're having one array, and inside this array we're having another property steps, and inside this steps property we're having another array, and with objects, 5 objects, as you can see here. And in the object here, as you can see, all the instructions are placed inside this step property, as you can see here. The first step is this, and the second step is this, and step 3, step 4, step 5. So first let's get this image here. So here we have to use curly braces, right? Because we're going to get this food details property. It is a state variable, right? So in order to write that here, we have to use curly braces. So after that, let's give food at this. So first we are going to render image, right? So to render image, we need to use image tag, and we have to give source as this property. That is that this image. So let's give food details dot image. Now let's check whether the image is coming or not. As you can see now the image is coming, right? So below this we are going to display title. So I'm going to display the title inside paragraph tag. So here I'm going to write a name. As you can see we are getting error guys, because whenever we write multiple HTML elements, we have to wrap them in a container. Like let's create a div tag, and inside this div tag we are going to copy this few values and paste it inside this. Now we will don't get any errors, as you can see. So inside this name we are going to get the title, which is stored inside our title property. Title. Now let's check whether we are getting title or not. Let's click on refresh. We're not getting the title, guys. Let me see the property name. Title. But we are not getting the title. Details dot title. Okay, guys. There is a small typo mistake. We have to give this. As you can see, our state variable is food details with D as a capital, right? So now let's open browser and see whether we are getting title or not. So as you can see here, we are getting title. I don't know whether you can able to see it or not. It's in black color. Let me select that. As you can see, we got the title as well as this text. So this is a static text that we have written inside here, and this will be a dynamic value, which is coming from Spoonacler API. This, and then below this, I'm going to display the price of that recipe. So for that, let me open console. So the price is inside this price per serving property, right? So let's give that price per serving. So let's create another p tag, and inside this I'm going to add a static text like price, and then we're going to add the dynamic text, which is food details dot price per serving. He will be capital and then serving. So now let's check whether we are getting price or not. Yes, we are getting the price here. As you can see, here we are getting the price, and then below this I want to display the time required to cook this recipe. So I'm going to write another paragraph tag, and inside this I'm going to use a static text like time required to cook. So inside this you have to specify this property ready in minutes. Let me copy this, and then here you have to give food details dot ready in minutes, and then I'm going to write minutes as a static text. So let me add a watch symbol as well, clock symbol, clock. So now that will be displayed inside our browser. Let me check. Now as you can see, we are getting that time required to cook with this emoji. So after that, let's add a paragraph tag with content instructions, and then below this I want to display all the instructions. So I'm going to create a div tag because these instructions are more than one element. So inside this we're going to write curly braces and then food details. So our instructions are inside. Let me open console. Ignore this errors for now, guys. So our instructions are inside this analyzed instructions array, right? So this is a property analyzed instructions. So we have to use food details dot and then analyzed instructions. So I have to give this as how it is displaying here. So if you write spelling mistakes, we don't able to get the instructions. Analyzed instructions, and then this is an array, right? So inside this array, we have to loop through the steps. So we have to use 0 and then dot and then the property name which is steps, and then we have to use map function. As you can see, inside the steps property, we are having an array of objects, right? So here, so we're going to call a callback function on every object. So inside this map, let me create a callback function. Also, we have to return whatever we write here. So I'm going to write paragraph tag, and inside this paragraph tag, we have to give a argument name here. Let's give it a step. So now for every iteration, the steps will represent a single step from this steps array. So we're going to get the step, right. So we have to give step dot step, step dot step. So after that, as you can see, we are not getting the steps, guys. Cannot read properties of undefined reading 0. So guys, we are telling React to get the 0th element of this undefined, which means this food details dot analyze instructions is returning us undefined, and we are not handling that error. That's why it is showing that in the browser's console. So to get rid of this, let me remove this, and let's create curly braces. So inside this, first we are going to check whether we have a value for the analyzer instructions or not. So if we have a value for this analyzer instructions, we are going to create a logical AND operator. So if this returns a value, we are going to go inside after this logical AND operator. So after that, we are going to check whether this food details dot analyzer instructions dot length is greater than 0 or not, which means we are checking whether we are having any value inside this analyzer instructions or not. As you can see, let me extract this. So inside this analyzer instruction, we are having an array, right? And we are checking whether the array length is greater than 0 or not. So if it is greater than 0, which means we are having a value. So after that, I'm going to use ternary operator, which means it is similar to if else block, but with a simpler syntax. So we have to use question mark and then colon. So if this returns true, whatever we write after this question mark, that will executed, and if this value returns false, whatever we write after this column, that value will be executed. So this is ternary operator. So if this returns true, I'm going to get that food details and then analyze the instruction. So inside this, we are having a one property, we are having one element inside this array. So in order to access that, we have to give the 0th index, and inside this array, we are having a property, as you can see here, a property called steps. So let's use steps, and inside the steps property, we are having an array of objects, right? So here, as you can see, we are having an array of objects. So we have to loop through this array, and we are going to get the number and step properties, because they are providing the instructions inside the step property. So here, after that, we have to use map method, and inside this, we have to call a callback function on every element inside that steps array, and we have to write an argument like, let me write it as step, and then I'm going to write the instructions inside a paragraph tag. So the step will reference a single object for every iteration from this steps array. So inside this, I'm going to use step dot number and then step dot step. So the step dot number will returning us the instruction number, as you can see here, number 1 for the first step, number 2 for second step, and so on. So that's why I'm returning like this. Sorry guys, this should be in curly braces, step dot number and then step dot step. So let me write dot in between these two, and then if we don't have any value for this analyzer instruction, we're going to return a paragraph tag with content no instructions available. Now we are handling undefined error. So if this value returns undefined, we're going to display this message. If we have value for this analyzer instructions and that length is greater than 0, we're going to loop through this steps array, and we're going to get the number and the instruction of that specific display by using the step dot step. So now I think it will work. Let me click on refresh. We're not getting that, guys. That means we made mistake somewhere. Okay, guys, we have to return this. As you can see here, we are not returning this paragraph tag. So now I think we will get that. Now, as you can see, we are getting the instruction here, right? So now let's link a CSS style for this food details component so that we can style our food details component. So inside the styles, I'm going to create a CSS file with name food details.css. Now let's link our CSS file for this food details component so that we can style our component. Import dot styles and then food details dot css. Now the CSS file is successfully linked. So let's give a class name for this root view tag like food details container. Also let's give a class name for this like what do I have to give? Let's give it as full details container. I'm giving very weird name, guys. Please ignore the names. You can give whatever you want. So also let me add a class name for this as well, like instructions container. So now, as you can see in our document, this header and this image are very close to each other, right? So let's add some margin top as well as let's make this content to be centered. So for that, we have to select this food details container. So let's select that food details container. Let's make the width to be some 60% and add some margin top of 100 pixels and then make auto so that it will be centered. As you can see, it is centered, but still, as you can see, there is a no gap between these two image and this header. So let's give some more margin top of some 120 pixels. Now let's check. Yeah, now there is a gap between this image and this header, right? So after that, let's add some styles for our image. So for that, our image tag is inside this div tag with class name full details container. So let's select dot full details container. Let's add some styles to this full details container, display flex and then flex direction column. After that, let's select our image and then add border radius of 10 pixels so that there will be a rounded border for the images as you can see here. Now let's decrease the width. As you can see, it is getting increased. It got increased. Let's add some width of 400 pixels. Now let's check how it's looking. Okay, now it's looking good, I think. So after that, let's add some hovering effect for this image. Like if you other hovers on this, we have to add some zooming effect. So for that, we can simply use. So when your other hovers on this image, we're going to transform the image scale to be some 0.9. Now if I hover on the image, as you can see, it is getting zoomed out, but it is very quickly getting zoomed out. So to add some smooth effect, you can simply use transition and then add some transition of 0.5 seconds. So now it will take 0.5 seconds to zoom out. Now as you can see, it is getting zoomed out very slowly, right? So now let's add some styles for our paragraph tags. So our paragraph tags are inside our full details container, right? So let's use full details container and then paragraph tag. Let's change the color from black to some this green color. Now if you see the output, as you can see, the color is changed. Now let's add some background color for this paragraph text. I'm going to add black background color and then increase the font size of some 20 pixels and also add some border radius of 10 pixels. I'm going to add padding of 10 pixels. So now if you see the output, as you can see, they are looking good, right? So now let's make this text to be centered. So for that, simply use text align center, and then after that, as you can see, the text is centered. Now let's change the background color of this instruction element so that user can able to know instruction text clearly. So instruction is here, right? So I have already given a class name for this class name with instruction. So let me select that dot full details container dot instructions. Let's change the background color from black to white and then change the text color from light green to black. Now let's check how it's looking. Okay, now it's looking good, right? But this image is not text. The image is not centered. So let's make this margin to be auto so that the image will be centered. So now the image is centered, right? So after that, let's check whether our website is responsive or not. So I'm going to minimize this Chrome. So after minimizing it, as you can see, our website is still looking good, right? So now let's click on no more and check whether our food details component is also looking good or not. So as you can see, our food details component image is not looking good, right? It is taking more width than the available width. So let's add some styles or food details component. So if you are familiar with CSS, I think you guys know about this media queries, which are used to make our website responsive. So replace the screen with max width. So I'm going to add some styles to all the devices, not all the devices, all the screens which are having maximum width as 768 pixels or less than 768 pixels. So at this point, the width of this browser is less than 768 pixels. So when it reaches to that point, I'm going to add some styles. So this image tag is inside our full details container, right? So let's add our full details container and then image. So I'm going to add the width as 300 pixels when it reaches to its maximum width as 768 pixels. Now it's looking good, right? So also let's increase the width of this paragraph tags or full details container and paragraph tag. Let's add some width of some 80%. Now let's check. Let's add 100%. Okay, now I think they are looking good, right? So let's make this width to be 100% for the screens which are having less than 768 pixels at the width. So let's select this food details container, dot food details container. Let's add the width as 80%. So now as you can see it is increased, right? Let's also increase the image width. Okay, now I think it's looking good, right? So now our website is responsive. If I click on no more, as you can see, we are getting some good styles for these screens as well, for the mobile screens. So now let me explain everything from scratch, guys. So at this point, we're having a value pizza, right? So let me open VS Code and then a body component. So here, as you can see, for the recipe state variable, initially you have given pizza. So since the value is pizza, inside this use effect hook, we are sending a request to a Spoonacler API with the dynamic value recipe. So currently it is pizza, right? The value of this recipe. So Spoonacler will receive a request to this endpoint with this query pizza. So when it sees this pizza, it will give us all the pizza items to this as call API variable, and we are converting that call API to a JSON, which is a human readable data, and then we are storing that response inside this set food variable to update this food variable, which is the empty array. But whenever we receive a data from this API endpoint, we are going to change this initial value from an empty array with the whatever response we get from this API endpoint. So after that, here as you can see, we are displaying the food list component, and then that's why we are getting this data here. So after that, let me open the food list component. So if we click on no more, let me click on no more. So if I click on no more, this handle no more function will be triggered, and inside this handle no more function, we are passing the ID of that food, and that food we are receiving inside this parameter with value ID. And whenever user clicks on this handle no more, we are also redirecting the user to this route, and we are passing the value of the food ID in the route. So now let me open that route. So after clicking on no more, user will be redirected to this path, and in the path we are having a path parameter. So whatever is that, so whatever ID has been assigned to the recipe, that ID will be passed to this route, and we are capturing this value by using this path parameter food ID. So now in the route, as you can see, we are seeing that food ID here. So when the route is that, we are going to render this food details component. So inside the food details component, we are sending a request to this API endpoint, and we are also sending the ID of the food in the route, so that Spoonacler knows what is the ID, and it will give the recipe which assigned to this ID. And we are storing the value received from server inside this call variable. After that, we are converting that data to a JSON, and then we are calling this set food details function to update the value of this food details with this response, whatever we receive from this server. So the response received from this is an object, as we have discussed earlier, and When we receive a response from this API endpoint, we are going to replace this food details with an empty object with the object that we receive from this API endpoint. And then we are accessing all the object properties which are inside this. And that's it for this video, guys. I hope you will understand this video. If you don't understand, please comment down so that I will try to explain it again. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Bye bye.